Do you remember that when you first heard of Schwing?
Oh, yeah.
Was it Schwing or Pootsmeister you heard of first?
No, Schwing, because Pootsmeister came late. Schwing because we were over there at the industrial fairs that they held
In Germany?
in Germany. And I actually met Mr. Wilhelm Schwing, the old man. He invited me into his facilities and had a drink, and he said, Mr. Bennett, the United States is a big place. Germany's very small. Why don't you go home? But that's the thing that made it difficult for me, because in Europe, every country has to survive on export. So they were experts at it. And I was an amateur at it. But fortunately, I had a secretary who understood the export business, and she helped a lot. But Schwing was the main one over there, and then Putzmeister came along. They were worse than the Japanese about copying things. But we had, our pumps ended up in almost every country in the world. Not through our efforts so much, but just through its reputation.
Because there was a need.
Yeah.
Right. So, when did you get out of the business? When did you guys decide to call it a day?
Well, actually, I didn't decide myself. The corporate office decided for me. Well, I was at a retirement age, but I really wasn't ready to retire. But the business had grown to a point where it affected the corporate balance sheet, I think. And since I said before we were headed for this recession, and I wanted to slow things down, and they disagreed with me. I thought they could put somebody else down there and keep it going. Well, you can't keep something going when there's no market for it.
Right.
And so I was retired. I stayed on as a corporate officer for 2 years, but finally retired completely.
Okay. Yeah. Who took over for you?
Some idiots.
That's why they went broke.
They went broke. Yeah. Well, what did happen with Thompson then?
After we left,
Yeah.
let's see how to say this. They were great at having meetings, great at recognizing problems. They had no solution for the problems.
But they didn't want another meeting.
Yeah, but then they didn't develop anything new. Like I said before, we had to have something new every 9 months or 12 months. And so it just slowly died, but then it died to a point where Carl Schlecht talked to me about it, and I said, yeah, why don't you go ahead and buy them? But I said, they're not worth very much, because if there's no organization there that can keep it going and produce something,
Right.
there's nothing to buy. But Carl Schlecht was desperate to get a foot in the United States. So when he found out he could buy it, he bought it. He later told me, he said, Richard, I paid too much. But see, Carl Schlecht and I go back a long ways, because when we were both younger, he used to come to the United States and visit me on La Cienega Boulevard when we were just building plaster pumps. And I'd go visit him in Europe, in Germany, when he was just building plaster pumps. And he and I would go up to a blackboard and draw the things on it. So we went back a long way, but he had more opportunities in Europe than I did in the United States, because first of all, the Lend-Lease program financed him. We had to use old used equipment to keep our place going, things, but at the same time, you have to have some knowledge of the construction industry and the business to be able to do these things. Carl was that way. His father was a plastering contractor. He knew the business. So
How did you meet Carl?
he came to LA one time and
Looked you up?
and looked Mr. Thompson up, and but I guess he's, what to say, Carl is a very energetic, industrial type of person. He was always, carrying his briefcase full of literature to sell somebody something.
Yeah.
He's a great guy, but
Do you have any stories about Carl? You and Carl?
oh yeah, I have a good one. He finally designed a truck-mounted concrete pump. And I took Mr. Johnson, our corporate president, to Europe once. And I said, you want to go over and meet Carl? And he said, sure. It was just across the channel. We flew over there. And Carl says, come out and see my new machine. It was on a job. So we went out there, and I don't know if you've ever heard of the free floating piston.
No. Huh?
You put a piston in a cylinder. It's long enough so it won't tilt. And the concrete's on this side, the water on this side. Water pressure pushes it. Then water pressure sucks it back. And you do it. Well, it pumps good, but the problem is the water would start to boil. And he had no way of cooling the water. They just had to shut it off because it wouldn't work anymore. And so he's not the only, he didn't invent that. Someone else had the same idea too. I think it was Mr. Sherrod there in Germany. But so that's when he tried to make a cooperation agreement with me to build pumps in Europe. But I decided that having this wholly owned subsidiary in England would be a better deal.
So how did he finally solve that problem? Do you know?
Carl,
Yeah.
he came up with the elephant trunk. Have you ever heard of that?
A little bit.
Well, the elephant trunk was very successful, except for one thing. It was so big and heavy, it was very difficult to change the wear ring that was on the sliding across in the hopper. So then he came up and he copied somebody. I don't think he ever thought of anything originally. He copied an S valve from somebody in Germany that had patented that, the Schwing valve. And that's the same valve that my friend Mr. Ian Hay was using in Australia for the Sidewinder.
How'd you meet Ian? Ian Hay.
Marvin and I started the Bennett brothers to take care of Thompson pumps and so on. And he just came over and found us and came out and met us. He says, do you want to sell my pumps? And I said, sure. So he started shipping his pumps over and I started selling them.
So he was Transcrete at that time?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah, okay.
Yeah, Ian's Transcrete.
Transcrete, yeah.
So he was building pea gravel pumps or big rock pumps?
No, it's a big rock pump.
Big rock pump?
Good pump.
Yeah. And so he was shipping him to Thompson?
No,
Bennett
to
Brothers.
Bennett
To
Brothers
Bennett Brothers, okay.
in Gardena.
Okay.
And he
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
ship them, he flew them in.
Flew 'em, yeah. It's cheaper to fly 'em than ship on a ship.
You remember what year that was? Was that before you were building pumps or after?
1975.
Oh, 75, okay.
After I retired.
Oh, okay.
I should have stayed retired.
I should have stayed.
So after Thompson, you started Bennett Brothers.
Yes,
And Bennett Brothers did what?
Just
Repair.
repair work on Thompson pumps.
We didn't do any manufacturing
Okay.
that I know of.
No.
Yeah.
And then that's when Ian found us, talked us into importing his pump.
Ian speaks very highly of both of you guys. So,
And he had a good pump.
Yeah.
yeah, he still does.
Yeah. And
I was angry because I hadn't thought of it.
well, you didn't read Carl's notes back in 1945.
So, what are some of the other names in the industry that you guys have had relationships with over the years?
It wouldn't be. There were some pumpers in the California area, but I can't remember their names now. And all I knew was the distributor names in the rest of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I do remember this contractor in New York City. He's a very nice gentleman. He bought a 600 pump, and we were out pumping this slab in this large building, and he wanted me to come back and be there when they did it. So I was there, and that New York trap rock was this son of a gun. I don't know if you've ever had any experience with anything like that or not, but it's so rocky that when it comes out of the chute and lands on the deck, you can walk on it. It's not even soft.
Yeah.
It's not fluid at all. And he was nice enough to keep fighting that until we got a mix that we could pump that slab with. And I forget the contractor's, the distributor's name now, but he kept at it until he finally made those pumps work in the New York area.
What were some of the proudest moments as far as types of jobs that you've done? Any what projects do you remember that stand out that your pumps have been on?
Well, I'll tell you one that I can remember was with the 747, which was the 5-inch boom. Out on the freeway bridge, the intersection of the two freeways, one, I don't remember the names of the freeways, but anyway, this bridge was very high, but they got the concrete up there, did the bridge. A few years later, an earthquake took it all down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
What, if you can recall, the lowest point in your manufacturing history when you look back and causes you the most pain or stress, or that you can remember, wish you could have done differently, or point in the career that you remember?
I don't think we could have done it any differently, but developing the cam for the plaster pump, Marvin must have made 300 or 400 cams, shapes, before we got one that would work. Then Mr. Thompson hired a plastering fella, parked it in his lot next to the building, brought in all this sand and gypsum, had him mix and pump it, trying to wear out that machine. And he couldn't wear it out, so I think that was a good time.
How about you, Marvin? What do you remember as a low point for you?
Low point, when we built that bladder pump and finished it at 2:30 in the morning, mixed up some grout and poured it in, and it wouldn't work. And I went home trying to figure out how we were going to pay for everything that we bought on credit.
That's before we worked.
And then the next day it worked.
Why did it not work the first day?
I don't remember, it just didn't work.
Yeah.
Put the grout in the hopper and it wouldn't come out the other end.
Well, 2:30 in the morning. Maybe it was operator error.
No, we worked a lot of times to that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was just a prototype.
You know.
What about your high points? Do you have a high point that stands out in your career?
No, I can't think of anything.
The high point for me was when we would develop a new model and sell it to the first customer, and I'd go out and watch it work.
Yeah.
To see that thing,
And to have the customer say, I want it.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.